And welcome in to the Golf Intervention Podcast. Whether you're a weekend warrior looking to shave a few strokes off your handicap or a competitive player striving for excellence, join us as we explore the science, strategies, and secrets behind mastering the game of golf. It is time for your Golf Intervention. How you doing today, Rob Fales? I know I'm doing pretty well here in Richmond, Virginia.
Doing great, Eric. Thanks for joining me tonight. Should be a lot of fun.
I want to start off by saying thanks to Mark Sweeney again. We had such a good interview with him. Aim Point. If you haven't listened to that episode, please go back and check it out. We could not be more appreciative, and it was so cool checking in on the PGA and watching all those guys in the final groups using Aim Point just like we said they did, and you could see it right on the screen. So really cool to see that. Those guys are really great putters, as we all know. And, of course, they're mostly using Aim Point. So kind of proved what we were talking about there. So that was kind of fun, yeah?
Yeah. It's like Mark said, it's almost surprising now when they're not using it, which is a testament to how accurate it is.
So on today's episode, we're going to talk about goals. And really we're going to talk about achieving satisfaction with your golf game and how do goals really play some type of role in that. I'm kind of excited for this episode in a way because it's going back. We're kind of going back in time, back to our first few episodes when we really started to introduce how the golf intervention was going to look at scoring strategies and who you are as a player and kind of break down the science of this thing and get you on a game plan for improvement. And so we're going back a little bit to that, and we're going to expand out on that a little bit here. We're going to start with goals, and it was really interesting because Robbie and I had a little pre-production meeting, and I said maybe we can expand on skill or on goal setting. And we had a long conversation, and we kind of went through goals, and I was going to entitle this episode "Why Rob Fales Hates Goals." No, I'm just kidding, just being funny, because he definitely doesn't. But I think it was a really good discussion about sort of parsing out how relevant really goal setting is to a golfer and how important it is for them, if it even is important, depending on who you are as a player. So when we look at goals, I was a business major in college, and they're going to teach you goals. There's this acronym SMART. Remember that, Rob? Did you learn the SMART goal acronym whenever you were in college? And the SMART goal acronym really it sort of stood for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. That was what SMART meant. And as you and I were discussing it, you brought up some really good points about SMART goals, which was, is that really how golf works? I mean, is it really, and the biggest sticking point I think that you and I found was the time-based element to it, although we found other sticking points too. But you as a golfer, as you're setting goals, I think that whether you realize it or not in your game, if you're satisfied or dissatisfied with how you're playing, which you're probably going to fall into one of those camps, right? You probably have some type of goal. We're actually going to detail 3 different sort of subsets of goals that you would definitely fall into. You go, oh, yeah, that's me. I have that goal, or I have 2 of those or 3 of those goals. And it's really probably a little bit better description of it than the SMART goal, don't you think, Robin? We're going to go into these here in a second.
Yeah,
but
no doubt.
Let's go back. Let's talk about the SMART goal for just a second. And I think that the SMART goal is really probably very helpful when you're talking about business strategies or sales stuff or that kind of thing, like in the quote unquote in the real world. But when you're talking about athletic performance, how do you feel like the SMART goal really attaches to that or is really relevant for that certain type of performance?
Yeah, I think piggybacking on our conversation we had actually just before going on air, I think it really depends on the type of goal. I think when it comes to being in the real world, a lot of times we can easily meet our goals just through effort, right? Just through cognitive understanding. I don't have this piece of information. I'm going to go find it. Now I have it. And a lot of people want to believe that acquiring golf skill is like that. They don't know how to do it. X-Pro tells them, here's what to do, and now they have it. And for many people, they haven't actually learned a motor skill since they learned to probably drive a car. And if you think about a lot of the clients that we're working with, 60 years old, 65 years old, who still have goals, they still want to play at a high level, you ask them, when's the last time you actually learned a motor skill? And you get some amazing answers. I mean, I've had 65-year-olds say, oh, I just learned how to play piano. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's incredible. And sure enough, they're typically quite a bit better when it comes to understanding the learning process. But even for a lot of people, when you really ask them to think about it and you peel back the onion layer after layer after layer, they haven't learned to do anything since they learned to drive a car, motor skill-wise, which is insane to think about. Like, learning in of itself is a skill. You can get better at learning. You can get worse at learning. And I think a lot of people fall out of touch with learning. And so I think this is going to be a really good episode because we're going to talk about what is it to learn and what is it to really have a game plan for how you're going to acquire a new motor skill.
I can't wait to get into this. I think that you and I being around busy, active golf places, we see people every day. Some very satisfied with how they're playing, others very dissatisfied with how they're playing. And I think my goal as an instructor a lot of the times is to say, hey, let's figure out what's going on there, and because I want you to be satisfied with golf. Like, for many of the people, although that not all, and by the way, I was just kind of involved in helping with someone's playing in a very large professional tournament this week. So nice. Some, not all, play for fun or play for enjoyment or recreation. And when whatever their expectation or quote-unquote goal gets misaligned from their current skill set or their current abilities or their current idea about how they should be playing, that's when the frustration sets in. And for me, like right now, being that I've played very little golf this year, like if you said, hey, Eric, let's play the two-man next week or whatever, I would have very realistic expectations about how I'm going to perform in that, so I probably wouldn't be too frustrated because I know I just haven't played very much, right? But I think golfers in general, people in general, like just not even in golf, but in life, we all struggle with that sort of realization, that actualization between, what is my performance? What should I be doing? What's going to make me happy? What doesn't? How do I get there? Right? And like you said, if I just work harder in a lot of things or I just put the effort in, I'm going to get there. But golf just really doesn't always work that way. And that's why the SMART goal doesn't always lend to the absolute best.
Not always, yeah.
It doesn't always lend to that. So what we're going to talk about here, I'm going to introduce 3 separate types of goals. Okay? They're a little bit different way of looking at it. The very first type of goal we're going to talk about, I'm just going to name them and we'll talk about a little bit. One is an outcome goal. Second is a performance goal. And the third would be a process goal. So outcome goal is really going to be like, hey, I want to do this thing. Like I want to win a golf tournament. I want to be valedictorian. I want to become, CEO of IBM. I want to be president of the United States. Like these are outcome goals, right? That I'm sort of have a vision for how I want to unfold my life or my career. A performance goal is going to be more about your skill set. Like this is going to be about me determining the skills that I have and then working on them to be a little bit better or improve them or keep them sharp or whatever, and they're measurable. So like in golf, the equivalent might be in performance. I want to hit more greens in regulation. I want to make more putts from 4 to 6 feet. I want to drive the ball further. Like those are performance-based goals. And then the process-based goal is really about the process of improvement, right? Like so how I'm going to work through what it is that I'm trying to do, how I'm going to train it, how I'm going to set up that process. So as we look at this from these separate outcomes, we can start to see now, Rob Fales, that there's some problems there with the SMART goals and how that all fits into that. Am I not right about that?
Correct. Yes. And I think the big differentiating factor that we discussed off air is just how, as you move from process to performance to outcome, you have less and less and less control over whether or not you achieve your goal or not. So again, what that looks like is from a process standpoint, it could be, all right, my process here is exactly what I'm going to do to read this putt. This is my process goal. I'm going to put my feet in the middle section of the putt. I'm going to walk back. I'm going to use that information to determine a start line. And then from there, I'm going to focus on my speed control, right? So that is a process, a mental process that you have complete control over. There is nothing that the environment or nothing that any other playing competitors are going to do to interrupt that process. Now, as you move from process to performance, even though the process is directly influencing the performance, you have less control over what's going on performance-wise. You can do everything in your power. The golf ball be up in the air in a in a bird fly across and hit your golf ball. Like you have much less control over, from a performance standpoint, what ends up happening. And then when you go from performance to outcome, so you think about the PGA that just happened, right? I would be willing I'd bet any amount of money that Bryson DeChambeau met or exceeded his performance goals. I mean, it was like the lowest total score for a PGA Championship in forever, I think, right? So even though he met his performance goals, he didn't meet his outcome goal of winning the tournament. And so from an outcome standpoint, that's where you really have virtually no control. I shouldn't say no control. You have some control, but you have much less control over the outcome relative to the performance and then relative to the process. So all this to say, and you can kind of see where we're probably going to end up going with this, is that we would highly recommend process goals. They're almost, I shouldn't say but they're pretty much mandatory for you to move to the next level. I think performance goals are still incredibly important to have, maybe a little bit less so than process. And then outcome goals, they can be great, but I think what we'll talk about in later on in the show is that they're not mandatory in all scenarios.
Yeah, and I think depending on who you are, and you're sitting there thinking about this to yourself, and this is what we're about on the Golf Intervention, is saying, as the listener, put yourself, just think about yourself for a second. And what are your goals? Are you much more outcome oriented? Are you saying, I want to win my match on Saturday. I want to win the club championship. I want to beat this friend of mine who I always play with. I mean, those are a lot of the times how we measure up. And I like what you said there about control. We have ultimate control over our process. And if we set the goal up to be process oriented, I think our performance will likely improve, not guaranteed.
Yes.
And therefore, if our performance likely improves, then we'll get some outcomes that we'll be satisfied with, I would think, unless we're not in the realm of reality, right? And
Right.
Like I was saying to you before we came on, I could go try to play on the PGA Tour. I would not do very well. And if I tried to think that was reality for me, I'd be very dissatisfied, right? So I'm very in reality when it comes to what my outcomes should be. And so when you look at performance, you and I we really spent a lot of time. This is where data really comes in for performance, right? But again, that can't really improve until the process improves. So I'm with you. I think it's all about process. Outcomes, yeah. I mean, they like you were saying, you don't have control of it. They kind of take care of themselves in a way. And Bryson had no control. There's no defense in the PGA Championship, right? Xander Schauffele just played better.
He's just standing there watching that putt go in while he's, warming up on the range. And that was a great example of outcome goals and how there's nothing you can do. You just was watching what was happening with that putt, and it just didn't go his way. So, yeah, I think that's a good representation of that for sure.
So now that we've defined these 3 types of goals, and you can sit there as a golfer, hopefully listening to this, and say, okay, yeah, like I can see what I've been looking to achieve with my game, and sort of tying my, whatever it is that I'm trying to do or trying to feel about my game to one of those types of goals, right? And this is different than the SMART goal thing, because I think that the SMART goal thing, and what we had a problem with was it was so like it's not really how athletic performance works anyway, and definitely not golf, because remember, golf is really hard. There's so many skills involved. There's such a diverse environment. You're really playing the golf course, but then you're playing the golf course against other players who are playing the same golf course. And so it just changes. It's just a different situation. So let's go into now with that framework in mind. Let's talk about the outcome-based goal.
Yes.
I think it's pretty easy to see here where the frustration lies in outcome-based goals.
Correct. Yes. I think the first thing that I would want everyone to do or not do is do not couple your self-worth with your outcome goals. And this seems obvious. This seems like everyone who's going to listen to this podcast is going to say, well, of course, I don't do that already. But you'd be surprised. There are questions, really relatively existential questions you can ask yourself of like, what if my best isn't good enough? Are you going to be okay? And you need to be able to answer that question unequivocally. Yes, I'm going to be okay, even if my best isn't good enough. Because, again, you have so little control over the outcome that if you start to say, okay, well, I am a golfer who wins tournaments. Well, then what happens if you're not winning a tournament? Who are you then, right? So you need to make sure that your outcome goals are just, it's like a compass. It's just pointing you in a direction of where you want to go long term. It is not a end all be all, and your well-being is not dependent on you achieving this outcome goal. I think that would be the first place that I'd like to go with that.
Yeah, it depends on what. I think there's a lot of deep psychological aspects to this whole part of it, because I'm way better as a coach talking about things like process and performance than I am outcomes.
Yeah.
And in fact, I don't talk about outcomes all that often. I think you and I were discussing that off air before we started recording. Is like, I don't know that I've ever had an outcome goal for myself. Part of that is because, just the reality of playing golf and teaching golf and being a parent, and like, I was always process oriented, always, and then performance to an extent. As I started being able to track things and try to figure that out a little bit more, but this is really before the stat age, right? Because I'm older, so that was a little bit earlier. And so I think that your motivations and sort of your self-worth and all those things are really questions that people have to ask themselves, right? Like, I'm not going to be able to solve that for somebody. But what I can tell you is the frustration that I see with people lies mostly in the outcome. If it's performance-based, we can work on it. Like typically we can work on performance numbers, and we can use the things that we talk about, data points and TrackMan stuff and whatever, scoring strategies, all these things. But when it comes to outcome-based, I don't have a lot of answers there, because this is really just the person and themselves trying to determine what it is their vision for their life is, right? So it's like, for instance, if my son, who came to me, who's a great student, right? He's graduating tomorrow, or 2 days from now, excuse me. Really excited. Great student. Going to the University of Virginia, which is just an absolute unbelievable thing for him, right? And if he said to me, hey, my goal is to be president of the United States, I don't know. I don't know what I would say. Like, well, that's awesome, right? And then he would have to try to figure out how he's going to perform and how he's going to work on his process to get there, right? And what I would encourage him is to say, you know what, it'd be cool to be the president of the United States, but that's really out of your hands, right? Like you can work towards that. You can make all these choices along the way. You can figure out how to study the best. You can figure out how to really take all the right career choices, meet the right people. But at the end of the day, it's really out of your hands, right? Something like that is in the voters' hands, or something like being president of IBM or something like that. That's out of your hands as well. Somebody else is making that decision for you. And so you cannot really look at that and say, son, my life would be worthless if I didn't achieve that, right? Like, and that's kind of what we see in golf sometimes, where the biggest frustration lies with golfers. I see it all the time, is they're just not getting to that outcome that they think they deserve, and then it's frustrating them, right? I think you and I would say, hey, that's a vision that you're having. Great. Now let's talk about what's really going on with your performance and with your process. Is that kind of how you would look at it too, Rob, or you got some different insight there?
No, I think we're definitely on the same page as far as that goes. And that gets into the relevancy of it, right? What is relevant for this person? We can't really tell you from an outcome standpoint what's relevant for you, but what we can tell you is relative to that outcome, what performance metrics are relevant, and then relative to that performance goal, right, what processes are going to be relevant for you. So that's where we more come in more often than not.
It was fun. We did a little exercise, you and I, before we came on the air, where we were sort of divvying up the pieces of the SMART goal and sort of graphing them into the different types of goals as far as process, performance, and outcome. And it was really interesting to do that. Most of them fell under performance, strongest under performance. Obviously, they could have ranges on each one of them. The outcome-based goal really only has two of the SMART goals that really are any part of that, which would be measurable and timely, right? Like outside of that, the relevancy of it, the achievable part of it, like none of that's really as relevant as it is to the other ones, right? As far as performance goes, almost everything applies to performance, right? Like every part of it is in the performance, but the most relevant we determined was the process, right? So that's so interesting. Well, why would that be? The process is what drives the other stuff, right? So that's really what it's all about. So we've discussed here outcome. We think outcome-based is going to be your most frustrating. So let's go to performance. I think performance can be a little more neutral in some of this. Like it's a little more, I'm trying to use the right term here.
It can be more neutral.
Searching for the right word. But basically it's like a little bit more, I was going to say it's almost less emotional because it's either a plus or a minus. Like in my performance goals, I'm either doing it or I'm not. Right, and then I should be able to with modern. This is kind of the point we made way back in episode 1 and 2 is, we can measure the metrics and then we can determine data points for you to work on, and then we just work on it, right? And that's just then we have a process to work on it. So, like if I want to hit more greens in regulation, you and I are going to figure that answer out for them. Okay, well, how many are you hitting it? Where are you missing it? What's your dispersion patterns like? Let's look at your face to path numbers. Let's look at your contact issues. Let's look at, all the relevant things and then put it into that, and then we'll be able to figure it out, right? So there's a little bit more of I don't want to say less emotional, but it's more math-based there. Like here it is. There's the data point, and it's not the data point. Boom, 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 off I go, right? Do you disagree with that?
Not at all. No, I think that's spot on.
And then we go into process, and that's a little more warm and fuzzy in a way. So that's kind of the way I look at it. I mean, like the process piece of it is more of the that achievement of waking up in the morning and getting on the Peloton and just knowing that you did it. Like there's an achievement to that like when you're in the process and you're trusting the process, like it just feels right, like it just feels right. So let's not glance over performance base here. I want to get into that a little bit with you. So when we look at the performance-based goals specifically, I think, again, going back to some of our first very earlier episodes, this is where we like to capture some data, right? Like, isn't it in the performance base, if I'm going to be satisfied with how I'm doing, if I capture data and capture statistics, and I can analyze them with something like GameForge, which we talked about with Mark Sweeney last week, isn't that really the thing that guides me towards my satisfaction with my performance goals?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's going to be where most of your attention's going to be, certainly right after you play, is what was I trying to do as far as performance metric side of it goes. How was I trying to do it? And then ultimately, what I do, right? What was the actual performance? And then because that is most directly tied to our processes. So really the performance is the feedback for, what kind of processes are the processes that I'm putting in place actually moving me in the direction that I want. And I know that based off of the objective, measurable, specific, right? The non-emotional performance metrics.
Yeah, non-emotional, measurable, mathematical. Like that's really what I was after. And I think that's the world I live in. Each and every day with my students is a lot of that performance based sort of relevancy. And obviously then you're putting in the process, like you're saying, to get to where you want to go. But every day I try to be in that moment. It's really interesting to me. I had some conversations with golfers who were sort of dissatisfied with how they were playing. I want to say they were very outcome oriented, not achieving that, and then sort of not going back into either their performance with some measurable data point, or they're into their process for that. But I think the performance was the key for this. Actually, it was a few people I was talking to with the same type of thing. Then they wanted to blame things like, I'm not committed to my shots, or I'm not trusting my swing, or I'm not, I need a sports psychologist and all this stuff. And my answer to them was like, well, no, it's like your club face is 4 degrees open and impact on your driver. You're always going to hit it in the woods. I don't care how much you trust it. I trust that swing, right? Like, and so if you can figure out those things in the performance, boy, you want to talk about gaining satisfaction with what you're doing. All of a sudden, you're not blaming yourself for these things. You're understanding what it is that you need to do to get better. And those performance type goals, like, hey, Eric, I can't break 80. Hey, Eric, I can't break 100. I don't know what's wrong with me. I need this and I need that. Well, no, I mean, let's talk about it. Let's look at your metrics. Like, we can figure it out. It doesn't have to be emotional, right? Like, This is where we can really get into the bottom of it and create solutions that are very much, like you were saying, they're very objective and measurable and unemotional, and it's just a data point. Like, nope, it's just a data point. It's not your self-worth. It's just a data point on a scale, and we can get you to where you want to go. And that's why I love how we teach golf these days with TrackMan, because I'm telling you, I did this for 15 plus years without it, and man, was that difficult to pull off in the past. But now we can do it, and I think that that's probably one of the most satisfying things that I see with my job these days, is seeing the answer for people, seeing the solution, like almost in a mathematical way, and them going like, I got buy-in, I can work on that, and that's where you go into the process. But anyway, I kind of see that a lot. Rob, do you see that same sort of thing as far as like self-confidence and all these things, as far as the outcome, when really it should have been a performance-based situation?
Correct. Yeah, I would completely agree. So let's get into some examples of kind of relative to an outcome goal, what's a relevant performance goal, and then process, just to kind of give the listener a little bit more color, a little bit more context behind some of these terms that we're kind of throwing out. What do you say? Awesome.
And maybe for them too, is like, when is it most important for me to have one of those in place, right? So you want to give an example first of a process? Do you want to start with process?
Yeah, we can move kind of through the SMART acronym, maybe even with some of these might be fun.
Okay, go ahead. You start it off though.
Okay, so outcome goal would be, I want to win my club championship, right? And then relative to that, I've looked at the previous winning scores. I can see that I'm going to need to shoot something in the neighborhood of, let's say it's a 36-hole event. Let's say I'm going to need to shoot something in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 under par to give myself a chance, right? So the 5 to 6 under par on a particular golf course would be the performance, or would be a type of performance goal, because it's just a number, right? It's just, hey, this is generally speaking what we're going to need to do. Now, for that, then you're going to break down, okay, what's my offensive opportunities, what's my defensive opportunities? Offense being like birdie opportunities, defense being, hey, I'm just trying to get out with par. Par fives, short par fours, maybe you short par threes, and then you've got your really long par fours, long par threes, which would be some of your defensive opportunities, right? And then looking at, for you as an individual, what are your performance goals? So like for, let's say this individual really struggles with the short game. It's like, hey, let's make sure that we get 100% of our shots on the green from inside of 40 yards, right? That could be, again, another type of performance goal. Now, as we peel back the onion even deeper, right? So we're going from almost no control, right, to pretty decent amount of control. But then now, what are we fully going to control, right? So from a process standpoint, let's say, again, I'm looking at short game. I'm trying to take advantage of my offensive opportunities on par fives when I'm pushing the green, trying to get inside 40 yards in two. You know, if I miss the green on par threes or par fours, my ability to save par. So for that, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to read the lie as best as I possibly can. I'm going to pick out a land area, right, and based off how far it's going to roll, right, I'm going to choose a club and a shot. I'm going to rehearse. I'm going to see it as best I can. I'm going to commit to creating that shot, right? So that's just an example of like a mental process that you could go through. Just an example for the podcast, but you can do that every single time. You can read the lie. You can pick a landing area. You can pick a shot. You can visualize the shot, feel the shot, and try to execute the shot as best you can. And whatever happens, at least you'll know that you met your process goal. Now, if you go through your process goal and you commit to that process goal, what we're saying is that your performance goal is probably going to be more likely achieved. If you didn't achieve your achieve your performance goal, then the question is, all right, was it the right performance goal? Number one, let's assume it is. Number two, was it just variance? Was it, oh, well, my process were good, everything was in place, just didn't work out for me this time, right? Everything happens in variance. You're going to have, it's like a bell curve, right? You're going to hit half of your shots are going to be better than average, half of your shots are going to be worse than average. You're going to hit a ton of shots that are average. Some are going to be amazing, some are going to be terrible, right? So everything's happening on this bell curve. So it could just be variance. What it also could be is that your processes weren't aligned with what you needed to do, right? And so that's when you can take a step back and say, all right, what do I need to build into my processes to better allow me to produce my performance goal? And so now we're looking at things very much from a, like you'd run a business, right? It's not just, oh, I feel like I need to do this, so I'm just going to go and see how this works. No, you're actually looking at what is actually moving performance in the direction of your outcome goal. If you have an outcome goal, like we said, you don't have to have one, right? And you're giving yourself feedback. You're giving yourself actionable feedback around what you need to do to kind of push yourself in the right direction. So that would be an example of kind of how you can move from outcome, win club championship, process. All right, we need to get this score. How are we going to build this score? Well, it's just an accumulation of offense and defense. All right, so for this particular golfer, let's say that they hit it tee to green really well, but once they get inside 40 yards, they kind of struggle. Well, now they're going to have kind of a spotlight performance outcomes, like, hey, let's make sure we never miss a green, and you can even put like proximities, P12s, P6s, right? If you're game forwards, you know what I'm talking about. And then process goals. How am I hitting these shots? What are the behaviors that are going to align with my process goals? What are my process behaviors that are going to align with my performance goals?
And would you put practice in the process part of the of that whole equation?
100%.
Okay, that's what I mean. That to me, that's like the biggest driver of that. And I think that as you go again, so we're talking about kind of the overarching theme. You know, if you looked at Bryson DeChambeau, maybe had a goal to win the PGA this week coming in, which would be very reasonable for him. He's, you know, a great player, one of the best players in the world. And so there's his outcome goal, to win. So then his performance, he might have set a metric. I'm going to shoot 20 under par this week. If I shoot 20 under par, I got to, you know, I'm going to do this thing.
Yeah.
He does it through all the things that you just said. You know, he works on his driving, and I need to hit this. And these guys are going through things like, you know, this week I'm going to need, you know, this type of shot for the par fives, or maybe this is a good shot I need on some of the par threes. So they're building towards they're periodizing their training and their skill set. This is a level 3 thing, by the way. Really level 4. We'll call tour player level 4. This is a level 4 thing where they're building up to this with specific skills inside their skill set to optimize for the certain course, the certain week, the certain conditions. And then the process obviously is trusting that and building the caddy and the whole deal.
Correct.
And that's a beautiful description of all that. So let's think about that whole thing again from a level 1 player. Like maybe my outcome goal here is break 100. So I'm gonna try to break 100. I guess is that too much of a performance goal?
Yeah,
I guess
that's more of a performance
goal,
yeah.
isn't it?
Outcome would be like I'm gonna beat my buddy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I see this all the time, right? I need to beat this friend of mine. He's obnoxious and he talks smack to me all the time, and I need to beat him, right? But I can't do it until I can break 100, essentially. So here I am, level 1 golfer. Maybe I got a buddy that's a level 2 golfer. So now I've got this performance goal of shooting a number. I gotta break 100 to beat this person. So when they're looking inside of that skill set to break 100, they come to see you or me or some other teacher. Like, they're going to need a definable thing to work on. And that's where we get into, that's where ball flight stuff comes in. Like, we're going to be creating skills for them that help them align with what someone that breaks 100 does, right? They've got to hit a certain number of green in regulation. It's not many, I don't think, right? Four or five. I don't have the data in front of me. I've got to have this amount of putts probably. I got to have not too many disruptors and penalty shots. And these are the things that are going to help me do that. And then the process is probably the hardest for the level 1 player or the level 1 player, don't you think? I mean, I would say a level 3 player to tour player is so in tune to a process, and they probably had to have that to get there. But the level 1 player, Rob, isn't this the place where the process really probably lets them down, so to speak?
Yeah, it's the biggest opportunity for development for them because they don't have one. They literally they don't know what they don't know. So at some point you've either got to give them a framework, or you just give them the information and then allow them to come up with a framework. But whatever they need to do, they need to understand again their relevant process goals, which for level 1 golfers are usually low point in 3 dimensions, right? Is it up, down, forward, back, right, or left? And they're keeping track of, right, where is my low point over time, right? They're not saying, okay, shot to shot. They're saying, okay, after the round of golf, where was my tendency in my low point? Because you do have control over where the low point happens. You might not feel like you have. You might feel like it's more variable than what you want. But the way that you swing the club is creating a low point, and you can get more or less aware of that low point. And the process of becoming aware of that low point is an amazing process goal. And so if you can have the process goal of becoming more aware of where the bottom of your swing is, more aware of where the face of the club at impact is pointing, more aware of the speed of the club at impact. Those are the golf intervention big 3. All right, low point, club face, speed. as you develop awareness of those things, and those are, for almost every level 1 golfer, that's going to be very well aligned to their performance goal of reducing shots to green.
I don't think there's any question when I have level 1 players, either in clinics or in lessons, I feel like, and you mentioned this a little bit before, is that we can all learn how to learn better, right? And I feel like my job with a lot of that level 1, level 2 player is really helping them learn how to learn better, right? Like it's about creating a process for learning, creating an environment to succeed in, getting a mindset that helps you achieve it, and then just building that up. And granted, I'm looking at the performance factors. There's no question about it. I'm looking at it every single time. But if we know that you've got this big data point, club face to path is open 7 degrees, okay, we're going to have a hard time here, right? So we're going to develop a process to we're going to know how to fix that from a swing technique standpoint, but I got to develop a process to practice it and implement it on the golf course. And so what becomes the most important thing? Well, it's really like the performance element in the lesson is really now just knowing what you didn't know, but that doesn't fix anything.
Correct.
Right? Like that is not the most relevant thing. And that's when we go back to process being relevant is I've got to send you, the student, out and say, here's the process for you to practice this thing and implement it on the golf course. And if we can't communicate that to our students, we failed them, because man, nothing bums me out more when it's like, then I hear, man, Eric, I can do it when you're here coaching me up, but then when I'm left on my own, I can't do it. And I'm like, I want you to be able to do it. I need you to be able to, and it's really hard because golf is hard. I get it. Like we all experience that. But my goal for you is to be able to do this when I'm not standing there. So the process is the key to that. We go back to this. The process is the most relevant piece of this, especially in that level 1 player. I don't think there's any question about it. So those are good examples. I think that hopefully gives the listener a little bit of a visual on that. Do you want to go through another example of that, Rob?
Yeah, I can think of a couple. So let's say outcome goal is to win the Masters. Right, you could go out and you could shoot the Augusta National course record, and someone else could come right behind you, have the tee time right behind you, and then break your course record to win the Masters. So again, you have an influence, but it's not direct control over. That is more your compass. That is your guiding light to, okay, what are the performance goals that I need? So then you're going to back that into, okay, performance goal would be I need to hit half of my par fives. I need to birdie half of my par fives. Right? Let's say that would be your performance goal, is that you're trying to figure out how to birdie half of your par fives. Then you're going to work that in. Okay, what are my go for green opportunities? And then you might have even like a underneath the surface, like, okay, my performance goal for this is to hit 75% of those fairways, right? So that might even be kind of a peeled onion of that performance goal. Now, from a process goal, right, let's make sure that in practice we are hitting the shots that we're going to hit the way we're going to hit them, some amount, right? We would prefer that it's a representative sample, which means if you're going to hit 10 drivers, let's hit 10 drivers the way we're going to hit those 10 drivers. And you can visualize the fairway, you can visualize kind of where the ball is going to end up, and then play the hole in from there, right? But then let's spend some amount of process time developing skill. So for this golfer, I can guarantee that face to path awareness is going to be very high on their list. Let's figure out where my bandwidth is, what my reference points are for my face to path, so I have awareness of where I need to operate within. This is going to be a really, really tight face to path awareness with this type of player, right? So that'd be more of like a skill aspect. And then from a swing aspect, what are the general movements that I need to encourage that would allow me to then control the face to path more predictably, right? And so I'm going to have, between this player and their coach, they're going to have some drill or some movement, some exercise that's going to encourage that. Maybe they turn that into a pre-shot routine. Okay, for this swing change that I'm trying to encourage, here's a pre-shot routine that's going to prime this movement, that's going to make it more likely that that movement shows up when I play. So now we're building processes that are relevant to actually playing the game. Because before you hit a shot, you're going to have to do something before you hit the shot. So can we use that time prior to swinging the golf club to help encourage the swing that is going to make the skill more accessible, and that skill be relevant for the performance goal of hitting 75% of the fairways of the par fives that you're going to hit into, and you're going to try to birdie half of those to win the Masters, right? So you can see how this all kind of flows together.
I think it's great. I think the listener here should maybe work through it a little bit themselves, like visualize what they want to do. It's really interesting. I wish people could have had some insight into the conversation we had, because it was pretty interesting how we ended up on this sort of outline for the show. Because you and I we kind of looked at each other and we're like, we're both very satisfied golfers with how we play in general. Play really well, number one. We're level 3 players. Number 2, we're both very satisfied with how we play. Like, I have days where I don't, like, I didn't play that great. But I never get really frustrated with it.
Yeah.
And I don't think in my life had an outcome goal. I don't think ever. Performance goals, maybe at times, some data points. Like, I went through a little bit of a time where I'm like, I need to get my club speed up, or, some proximity stuff maybe in the short game. I was really working on hard with wedge play. But for the most part, I was always focused on just the process, just always focused on the process. And I've always been fairly content with how I've played, as I've moved along through. But everybody's different, everybody's very different. And so I think that you can't box yourself into the SMART goal framework in golf, because it just doesn't really work for those reasons. So I think what we're going to do, Rob, is you and I are going to work on a worksheet for the listener that we're going to put on our Substack. Yes. We're going to put that out on the Substack. And it's going to help them work through some of these goals and kind of outline a little bit better for them. So, if you hadn't heard from us yet, we do have something called a Substack, which is really just where we put our content on the internet. It's the golfintervention.substack.com is where you can find us. We have both free and paid subscriptions on there. So some of the stuff we're going to do will be behind a paywall. We definitely will have a bonus episode every month, we've promised, out there, plus some other really good stuff. And Robbie, you've written some incredible stuff for that already, which is all very golf intervention focused, right? It's like very much what we talk about on this show. So if you want to support the show, we would love to have you subscribe to the Substack. Either way, if you want the free, that's totally fine, because we're going to put stuff out there that's not behind the paywall too. And every time something comes up that we do put behind the paywall, you're going to get a little notification about it. And so you'll see if you think that's something you want to check out or not. But those of you that have subscribed and are supporting the show, we can't thank you anymore. It's really cool to have that happening for us.
Yes.
I think it's been really fun so far to figure that thing out. I think you and I are still figuring out the best ways to use that. But it's fun. It's fun. It's a fun thing for us. So we're going to put some stuff out there on the Substack where it comes to this process, this goal conversation that we're having. Because what we want to do is drive you towards golf satisfaction. Isn't that what we said? Like, we want to be satisfied with how we play. We want to enjoy the game to the utmost. And I think some of this is really a very, very big part of that.
Without doubt.
So as far as goals go, Rob, anything else you'd like to add to that conversation?
I think we covered it. I think that's a good summary for sure.
So once again, goals in golf are a very interesting thing. Think about to yourself what it is that you've been focusing on to determine whether or not you're satisfied with how you played. Is it an outcome? I want to beat this person. I want to win that thing. I want to whatever. Performance is more about your score and your skills and some metrics that are measurable that you're putting out there. It's very, like I said, it's almost mathematical. It's not emotional. Or have you been more process oriented? All of which have their place. And so just figure out what you want to do. You don't have to write it down. Again, Robbie says, I've never written a goal down, Should I have not shared that with the listener? That's because we just keep it in the back of our mind.
Never written an outcome goal down. Yeah.
I think it's... Yeah. That's right, an outcome goal. I think it's so interesting. What you'll learn from Robbie and I, and I think it's funny that we're just on the same page on a lot of this stuff. You can listen to some stuff on whatever you want to, podcasts or who knows, Instagram stuff or YouTube. And it's like, all this motivational stuff that's like, you got to put your goals on your lock screen on your phone, or you got to write them on your mirror, and you got to, positive out. I mean, yeah, all that stuff's relevant to some people too. Like, again, I've never really had to do any of that stuff, and some of you would go like, yeah, that wouldn't work for me, and other people would go, no, I have to do all that, otherwise I would never achieve a goal. And that's all of it's fine, and every part along the spectrum is good. So don't let anybody tell you what's right and wrong there. You know thyself, thy best, and that you're going to be your own best guide. We've always said that here. We're not telling you what to do. We're helping you help yourself along the path. That's our ultimate goal. At least that's what we're trying to do. And we thank you for tuning into the show. If you want to support the show, again, find us on Substack. We'd love for you to apply or to subscribe. Also, if you could rate and review on either Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen, that would be really awesome too. We've got all 5-star ratings, which I'm so proud of. And the biggest thing you can do to support this show, if you want to keep Rob and I motivated and excited, is really just share it with people. I mean, that would be the most powerful thing you could do for us, is just share. Yeah. Tell your friends, put it on your Facebook or your Insta, whatever, and your stories and whatever your stuff you got out there. That's the most powerful way for people to find us, because, we're not marketers. We're just a couple of guys trying to help people play better golf. Anything you'd like to add here at the end, Rob?
That's it.
All right, people. We'll be back next time, and we're going to talk a little bit more about skills on the next episode. So don't worry. We're going to bring the heat with some skills. Tune in next time. Thank you. See you soon.
Cheers.